Well, we've been talking about Paul's second missionary journey, and we said that Paul spends a considerable amount of time, about a year and a half, in Corinth. This was the home to the Isthmian games, because there is an isthmus, hence the name. Paul uses then, undoubtedly, I think, Paul visited these games. Does it say so? Can I cite you a chapter and verse? No. But I'm pretty confident he did. And he has lots of allusions to sporting events. So what I wanted to do today was to talk about some of the sporting events that Paul might have seen. We know this from archaeological record because of the excavations at some of these sites. We know it from a literature and allusion. We know it from illustrations that we find mostly on, as you see here, red figure pottery. Several years ago now, I don't know how many, I lose track. Let's say 15 years ago, 13 years ago, when you guys were in diapers. I went to Greece. What's that?
I said, well, that's not condescending.
It's not wrong either.
Anyway, I went to Greece on a grant. Somebody paid for me to go. Quite a bit of money. It was a grant. It was actually a multi-year grant to study sanctuaries, Greek sanctuaries in Greece. One of the things we did, one year we went to the Harvard Center in Washington, D.C. and did some work, had a library there and all that kind of stuff. But one summer we actually went to Greece. And we were there for about 2.5 weeks, almost 3 weeks. And we visited several of the sanctuary sites. But here's the thing, the sanctuary stuff, a lot of it is tied in with athletics. Because one of the things about the ancient Greeks is they were highly competitive. They competed about everything. They competed, obviously we know in athletics, right? But they also competed in art, in drama, in poetry, in music, just about anything that you could possibly compete, they devised a way to compete. And so these athletic contests that we think about, like the Olympic Games, the Isthmian Games, and so forth, were tied in with religion. And they had sanctuaries there to different gods. This particular one, as we had up here, is dedicated to Poseidon. So this is the aerial view, either a balloon, this might have been, now today we do it with a drone, but anyway, you get the idea that this is the temples there of Poseidon. So they would build all this athletic stuff, but the thing that would be different is they would also build temples, and it'd be part of worship of Poseidon in this case. Or the one at Delphi, it would be to Apollo, and so on. So when I went to these and visited these places, we went to 3 out of the 4 Pan-Hellenic game sites and visited there and studied them, along with other things. Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you may just think, oh, it's just a bunch of, athletes, because that's what we've kind of reduced it down to. The Olympics is just, okay, each country's got their thing, and they got their flags, and they come out and do their stuff, and they get their medals, and then it's over. It was a little different in the ancient times. But related to Roman, this stuff continues down into the Roman period, and of course, the Apostle Paul uses illustrations, allusions, references to various athletic events throughout his writings, his letters, so forth. So, where was the Apostle Paul exposed to this? Most likely it's here, because he was staying, 5 miles, 6 miles from the site of one of the Pan-Hellenic Games that would happen every 2 years, and he was there for a year and a half. So chances are he was there when it was happening. All right. Well, what did they have? What kind of events did they have? They had boxing. Their boxing's a little different than what we think of as boxing. We'll try to talk about that today, depending on how much time we have. Equestrian events, of course, that means with horses, right? Equestrians. So one of those would be chariot racing. This was a big, big deal, chariot racing. You know, I lived in Kentucky for many years, right? 18 to be exact. Horses are pretty big in Kentucky, right? They're pretty big. Horses everywhere. And I don't know if you've ever been to Kentucky or if you've ever been to any of those horse farms. Beautiful, beautiful horse farms around, let's say, Lexington area, Lexington, Kentucky. So if you get a chance, you ought to visit. But the one thing that's about that kind of racing, thoroughbred racing, like say the Kentucky Derby and so forth, is that the guy who rides the horse, the jockey, is not that famous. You know, some of them are kind of famous because they've been doing it for a long time. But when the horse wins, who gets the notoriety? The horse, but more than that,
The owner.
the guy that owns the horse, right? Because they'll say this horse belongs to whoever, horse breeder, horse, you know, guy, Fred Smith, and Fred has had 8 champion horses and so forth, and then he comes out, you know, and they celebrate the owner of the horse, who, to be honest, doesn't go out there and train the horse. He doesn't groom the horse. He doesn't ride the horse. He just mainly bankrolls it, and I suppose you might say uses his horse smarts to, you know, buy the right horses or breed the right horses to get a champion. It was the same in ancient Greece. In the chariot race, it was not the charioteer, the guy who was, you know, who really got the fame. It was the guy who owned the horses. Because owning the horses, they had to have multiple horses for these races. It was very expensive. You had to have the chariot, you had to have the horses, you had to transport the horses from place to place, you had to feed them, you had to care for them, you had to train them, and so on. So, again, in a lot of the writings about chariot races, we hear a whole lot more about the guy who owned the horse than the guy who was driving the chariot. Okay? There was also riding of horses in other events, you know, kind of like we have too. Obstacle kind of races where they just race in speed, you know, stuff like that. But the chariot race was the big thing. Now, that's equestrian events. So you had boxing, you had equestrian events, you had the pancraton. What is the pancraton? Well, we'll talk about it later. You had the pentathlon. The pancraton, by the way, was kind of a fight. It's more than boxing. It was sort of like, you know, you've seen these guys that like they look like they're going to box and they go up and kick the guy. You know what I'm talking about? And then kick him where you're not supposed to kick him, and then you throw him down, you know, hit him in the head. I don't know, do whatever they want. That's pretty much what the pancraton is. It is just an all-out fight. It's not like boxing, you know, where you got the rules. There were some rules, but there weren't many rules, okay? That's what that is. The pentathlon, of course, means 5 events. They had no decathlon. That's a modern invention, but they did have a pentathlon. You had to throw the discus, okay? You had to throw the javelin. You had to do a jump, which is not exactly like the long jump that we do today. You had a running event, and then you had a wrestling event. These were the 5 events. And then you would be scored, so to speak. You would win those events. Whoever won the most events or won them by the margin would become the pentathlon champion. Okay. All right, so let's talk about each of these events as much time as we have today. First one, ancient boxing. First of all, and I know you guys are boxing aficionados, but I also know the first rule of your fighting is that you don't talk about it, so I won't ask. First of all, we're used to boxing. If you have a heavyweight championship bout, 15 rounds is what that is. 15 rounds. And so we have timed, I don't know, what are they, like 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
Yeah. So you do 3 minutes, bing, you hit the bell, then you got to stop. You go to your neutral corners, da-da-da-da-da. You go to, you sit in your corner and a guy does stuff to you. And you get like a minute, something like that, boom, then you go back in. And you keep going until somebody passes out or gives up or whatever, all right? No rounds. No rounds. You just keep going. You just keep going. So you can't use some kind of strategy to wait for the bell, get a little bit of water, get a little bit of rest, get a little bit of advice. You're just out there. How do you know when somebody wins? When somebody gets knocked out or gives up. Okay? So there was no time to it, and there was no, like, judges. Like, we have judges that say, oh, Pensa won the first 3 rounds, but he's got this many points, and then so what do we have? We have a draw. There were no draws, and there was no sort of technical knockouts or winning on judges' points or something like we have today. Okay, so it was just you fight until a guy gets knocked out and he can't get up, or until he gives up. Now the other thing they don't have is they don't have boxing gloves. We have boxing gloves, right? They would wrap their hands. You can see it in this drawing. They would wrap the wrist and kind of wrap the hand with a strap, a leather strap. Also, by the way, and of course, I never knew this as a rule because this is most of the time when I get hit is when I'm down. But there was no rule against hitting an opponent when they're down. That's when I get most of my shots in life. They just hit me when I'm down. They kick me when I'm down. Whatever. Also, there was no weight class. So, it wasn't like we got, a featherweight, lightweight, middleweight, heavyweight. I don't know all the different classes. But, you just went out there. Whoever was out there, you went out there. And, yeah, go ahead.
Interesting thing about the boxing gloves, this is actually way safer to box without boxing gloves than it is with boxing gloves. The amount of brain injuries in boxing has gone way up since they started requiring gloves because you can hit harder without damaging your hand.
Yeah.
The same amount of force is transferred to the other person's head. So you're hitting a lot.
So you're suggesting it's a good thing we have boxing gloves?
It's a bad thing we have boxing gloves.
So you don't want brain injuries.
Right.
You're saying that's a negative thing. Okay.
Negative influence on the sport.
Well, we should get rid of weight classes too. And rounds. Let's go back to the original Greek and Roman boxing.
Going back to 100-round fights as opposed to 15-round fights.
Yeah, 100 rounds. There were 2 divisions, men's and boys. So it was kind of an age thing, but there was not a weight class. And by the way, none of this Don King-like promotion. You probably don't know who Don King is. You know who Don King is? No? Google him sometime. He has very interesting hair. Very interesting hair. He was a there are many others, but he was one of the very famous boxing promoter, Don King. And he had like sort of pointy hair. I don't know. But he would get out there and this is what they do is they'll get like 2 people and they know they're gonna fight each other and then they hype it, right? And they do all kinds of media stuff, to get you to interested or try to get you interested. This you were chosen completely at random. So you could not prepare ahead of time. The people are there. Okay, these 20 people are going to box. Boom, here's your opponent. Get up there and start hitting each other. That's pretty much it. So not much strategy ahead of time. Try to psych the guy out or whatever. This is just a brawl. But they do wrap the hands with straps. So mainly to Mainly, I guess, to guard your knuckles, so you can hit hard and still not tear up your knuckles. And also around the wrist so that the wrist doesn't get sprained. So instead of gloves, wrapped leather thongs. That always makes people interested when I call it that. But these are straps. It's called the hemates. They wrap it around their hands and wrists. But guess what this does? It leaves your fingers free, and you can use them. No rules against, the eye gouge, pulling the ears and stuff. I mean, there was a lot of, it was a fight. Much like, Taylor's accustomed to this because, he street brawls on the weekends.
Rule against, biting?
Biting? I don't believe there was a rule against biting, no.
So, Mike Tyson would have done that.
Mike Tyson would be fine. Him and his birds. All right, let's move on from this before we say anything else. 4 types of races. These are foot races. There was a stadion, which was 1 stade long. You wonder where we get the word stadium, and stadium, it all comes from a Greek distance of 192 meters. A meter is a little over 3 feet. So, okay. Then there was a 2-stade race. Long distance was 7 to 24 stades. So the 1 stade, 192 meter race, 2 stade, 384 meters, and the long one would be 1,300 to 4,600 meters. Okay? There was another race that we do not do anything. These we kind of imitate, right? We'll have sort of sprints and long distance, but here's one we don't do. A 2 to 4 stade race in armor. Because, a lot of these games were to prepare you for military sorts of things, or, sort of based around that, sort of the fighting, the javelin throwing, and stuff like that. This one was, because, by the way, if you haven't yet noticed from the illustrations from the pottery, all the athletes compete in what my mother would call your birthday suit. Okay? Being naked is gymnos. This is why we call it a gymnasium, because it's a place where you're supposed to go in there en naturel and exercise. Not that I'm advocating that, I'm just explaining. But what they would do is they would put a standard hoplite armor on somebody, on the athlete, and then have them run between 300, about 400 to 800 meters in the 50 to 60 pound armor. At the university, I believe at the University of Pennsylvania many years ago, one of the professors of classics took this and sort of experimented with it. He went out and he got the football coach to let him put like armor on some of the players and have them run without it and then run with it to see how they would, how would they do. And he wrote it up in some article or something. But anyway, interesting, so you could kind of do that. This again was to imitate the idea that you're in battle, you're in armor, and you may well have to run. Now you're supposed to be running at the enemy, not away. How about wrestling, or as we used to call it, wrestling? You must throw the opponent on the ground, landing on a hip, shoulder, or back for a fair fall. That is pretty close to the way things are. Three throws were necessary to win a match. So it wasn't the pinning. See, in wrestling today, it's pinning the shoulders down for a win. Here it was the throws. Yeah, I have limited wrestling. In my school, we did not have a wrestling team. So I will tell you a very brief story about my wrestling career. But they decided, some guy moved into town, because we lived in a small town, And he talked the school into letting him, he wanted to become a wrestling coach. He wanted us to get wrestling. But he started a wrestling club. Okay, so it was like an intramural wrestling. So we would meet after school, and then he would teach us about wrestling. He would teach us legal holds and illegal holds and that sort of thing. Now, as you can see, as I stand before you, I am a rather large individual. This guy, I was bigger than him as far as in stature, even in high school. But this guy had gone to, and I know someone here is going to like this, Ohio State University. Yeah. And he had rings. He had been like on the national, whatever, Big Ten, I don't know what all he had done. But this guy, you know, his arms were like, you know, like most people's thighs. The guy was very strong, is what I'm trying to say. So, and he decided for some reason that I was going to be the guy that would be used for demonstrations. So he would say, John, come over here. Yeah, all right, everybody can see this? Watch. Now, John, I want you to go and grab my legs like this and try to pull me down. So what? He goes, yeah, just reach down, grab my legs, try to pull my legs out from under me. And so I would do that. And then immediately I would be like in pain, flipped over, on my back, you know, this kind of thing. Or he'd say, now, John, here's what I want you to do. You know, you have the position where the guy is, I don't know if you know anything about wrestling at all, but you have the down position where the guy's on his knees and his hands. That's a starting position. If somebody was in that position, you have to start from that position. So the person who has the advantage is the person who's above them. So he goes, John, here's what I want you to do. I want you to try to grab my arm and, you know, anyway, you get the idea. And then he would, if somebody said, oh no, how'd you do that again? And then, you know, I'd have to do it again. So basically, it was just me being thrown about, beaten up. That's my memory of wrestling by this guy. But he always thanked me at the end. He was always kind of nice about it. Yeah, John, oh, good job. Yeah, all right. John, now here's what I want. You know, and whenever he said that, I knew there was going to be pain. By the way, there are illegal holds which he also demonstrated on me, which I will not describe. One was called the T-ride. He said, never do this. You see this? See if I do this? Now you see when I do this, you see John's going to go anywhere I want him to go. This is the T-ride. This is illegal. Don't do this. You can do a half Nelson, but don't do a full Nelson like this. Etc., etc. This could break the guy's arm. You shouldn't do this. So, you know, after a while I decided maybe wrestling club was not for me. Now, this should get some people's attention, so I won't even say it. Also, breaking your opponent's fingers was permitted. It was permitted in wrestling, but not the illegal holds on different areas. Okay, let's move on. It brings back bad memories, especially the T-ride. You'll have to look that up. The T-ride. So here you see guys wrestling. Each one of these I've tried to find pottery, in this case red figure pottery, which demonstrates some of these things. Here is now black figure pottery demonstrating the pancraton. This is a combination of boxing and wrestling. Punches are allowed, but the hands are not wrapped. So you'd like this. This is bare knuckle. No biting, no gouging of the eyes. You know, sometimes it happens. No ripping the nose or the mouth with fingernails. But you'll be happy to know kicking in the belly was legal. You can kick them in the stomach. All right, so this is just a little overview of some of the events. Limited detail, because we don't have a lot of time. But, you know, you could do a lot more detail on these. Any one of these things could be researched. Well, what about the Isthmian Games and the NT, as I call it. That's my code for New Testament. That's in the Bible. I recommend it to you, as I do about every week. You can read about some of this stuff in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul writes to the Corinthians, and he makes sporting event illustrations or examples. Wow, really? Because people in Corinth knew about this stuff. So this is an allusion to competition. For example, Paul, on more than one occasion, depending on who you think wrote Hebrews, and of course, I'm so radical, I think Paul wrote it. He talks about running the race. He talks about, but he does that more than once. And also laying aside weights, and training, and boxing, and winning a crown. This is what happens at the end of the match. You didn't get a medal, you got a crown. But the crown, of course, was not a metal crown, it was made out of vegetation. Depending on which game, it would be which kind of crown you would get. One was wrapped as celery, another one was laurel wreaths, and so on. So here are lots of allusions to competition, running, striving, training. You train your body, you run, so forth. So you see here in Acts 20, Ephesians 6, Philippians 3, 1 Timothy 6, 2 Timothy 4, and, since I'm so controversial, Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. That's just how I roll. I'm sorry. I think Paul wrote it. So you've got to live with that. Also, Paul mentions several times, and other times in the New Testament, there's mentioned a crown or a prize, right? So you see this in Colossians 3, 2 Timothy 2. James mentions it in James chapter 1. In Revelation, of course, we know about crowns. Were all of these athletic crowns? I don't know. We could debate some of that, but I think a lot of it was. Let's take a look. Here's a passage. 1 Corinthians 9. Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one gets the prize? Competition, running, prizes. Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. They're just getting vegetation. It's not going to last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. See the comparison Paul makes. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. No, I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. That is just filled with sporting, Pan-Hellenic, Greco-Roman sporting imagery, right? Crowns, running, training, so forth. Competing. How about Acts 20? However, I consider myself worth nothing to me, if only I may finish the race and complete the task the Lord Jesus has given me, the task of testifying to the gospel. Ephesians 6, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, powers of this dark world, against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. Again, this idea of struggling, that word is an athletic, often used of athletes, struggling. Philippians 3, not I've already obtained this, I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of. Forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead. This verb, straining, is there. I press on towards the goal to win the prize. And so here in Timothy, fight the good fight. And then later, I have fought the good fight. 2 Timothy 2:5. If anyone competes as an athlete, he does not receive the victor's crown unless he competes according to the rules. James. Blessed is a man under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive a crown of life. Revelation also, this idea of the crown of life. Hebrews 12:1, whoever wrote that, said, let us throw off everything that hinders and entangles and run the race with perseverance. Okay, so there we go. Now, those are just some of the examples, just to give you an idea. So we see then, this is Corinth. You can see numbers 1 and 2. Those are the two harbors. And then near 2, in between 2 and Corinth, is where the game took place. The Smithian games. Now I'll just show you a few pictures of Corinth. We're going to run out of time soon, but this is the only thing that was left when the Romans came in. Remember, General Mummius destroys the whole city. He leaves the temple to Apollo, and still part of it standing today. Very famously, 7 pillars are there. This is the temple of Apollo, built in the 6th century, still functioning, still there when Paul was there. Originally had 38 columns, only 7 of which are still standing today. They are Doric columns. It's one of the oldest preserved temples in Greece. And so here's another view of those columns. So you see Doric has very simple capitals and rather simple columns. This is the forum area, what's left of it. Again, the ruins are not that impressive to the visitor, but they are extensive. Paul would have been in this forum when he was taken before Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia. All right, we'll end it there for today.